USC from outside. Sixers lead, courtesy of Tyrese Maxey.
Deep to left field, going back is Locastro. It is gone!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast here on Pick Swap Media. Your host, Ryan Coyle, continuing on with our college football preview series. 24 days from recording this, we have kickoff between Florida State and Georgia Tech. So the season is getting here closer and closer. Trying to get you a preview one of, if not every other day during the week for some of the top teams, the top programs, the top brands in all of college football. So far, we just recorded Oklahoma. The other day, we did Florida and Clemson. We've already hit on Michigan, LSU. We've hit on Nebraska. We've hit on Memphis. We hit on Penn State. We hit on Colorado. Hitting on them all. We're saving the big boys for last. My goal is for kind of the last week to hit on Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Texas. So getting through some of the, I guess, middle tier kind of programs, middle tier brands, but teams that are going to be on our TV, teams that we're going to be watching, teams that are going to be front and center as part of the college football spotlight this year. And no team has the brighter lights than out in Los Angeles at USC. Just before I started recording this one, I recorded an Oklahoma episode. Obviously, the former head coach at Oklahoma, now is the coach at USC. And it's a big year for Lincoln Riley heading into year 3 at USC. 19-9 through his 2 years. He is 74-18 as a head coach, though. Has coached 3 Heisman Trophy winners, 3 number 1 overall picks at quarterback in Baker Mayfield, Caleb Williams, and Kyler Murray, but has never won a college football playoff game. He's always lost at least 2 games in every single season he's coached. And last year was definitely the biggest down year of his head coaching career with that atrocious defense, for lack of a better word. And not a subpar year from Caleb Williams, but if he wasn't an absolute Superman, they weren't winning games and they struggled last year. So we'll get into everything. Just kind of touch on the head coach there. We'll get into a little bit about the 2023 season, the offense coming into this year, the defense coming into this year, and then my schedule prediction for this squad. USC, one of the bigger names in college football in terms of, just normally with their overall brand, but for realignment as well. Going from the Pac-12 to the USC, and we're used to seeing these Lincoln Riley kind of flashy finesse teams. They're going into the conference full of men now, and they're going to have to compete up front if they're going to want to win football games. When you look at their 2023 season, an 8-5 year, a down year for, I think, Lincoln Riley standards, for a guy that perennially wins 9, 10, 11 games, competes for spots in the college football playoff. Even coming into the year last year, they were pretty widely viewed as the Pac-12 favorite, with Caleb Williams coming back and the expectations that he would repeat as the Heisman Trophy winner last year. They only go 5-4 in the Pac-12, and now, as we said, transferring over to the Big Ten. It's a big transition, but to keep it simple for how they were last year, great on offense, statistically terrible on defense. They scored 40 or more points in 9 of their 13 games, but also gave up 30 or more in 8 of their 13 games. So really high-profile offense, which you're used to seeing with Lincoln Riley, but a pretty poor defense, which we've also grown kind of accustomed to seeing with Lincoln Riley, especially in his 2 years at USC now. But not a lot of faith, I think, from the outside world that their style of play is going to be able to translate to the Big Ten with what we've seen from Lincoln Riley and playing Big Ten football. Those two things really don't kind of line up. So there's a lot of a reason to believe, and especially in my eyes, that this could be a major wake-up call for them. I just touched on in my last episode, Oklahoma, and kind of the roster that they have going to the SEC. USC could be in a very similar type of spot. I think heading into year 3, it was expected that they would be a national title contender. Like, this would be, going into the year, this would be a top 5 squad. And personally, I think right now it's not really even close. Year 1 under Lincoln, they would have went to the college football playoff had they beaten Utah in that Pac-12 title game. Caleb Williams was having a great first half, popped his hamstring towards the end of the first half, and Utah really kind of never looked back from there. Williams stayed in the game, but was clearly not himself the rest of the way. And then last year, a real down year. You had the moments with Williams. It seemed like he was really upset, frustrated, crying after the game sometimes. It was just a tumultuous season, I think we can all agree. In LA last year, at USC. So, like I said, the expectations when you're paying a guy $10 million a year, you'd be a national title contender probably as you enter the Big Ten. Those expectations I don't really think are quite close right now. Only returned 5 starters on offense and 4 on defense. Lose the number 1 pick and former Heisman Trophy winner in Caleb Williams. If I'm a USC fan, I'm worried about this season, heading into the season, and kind of going forward if we have enough faith that Lincoln Riley has the ability to build a Big Ten type of roster. When you look at the offense this year, we kind of touched on this, but ever since Lincoln Riley took over at Oklahoma and then at USC last year, he's had a superstar QB running the show. Baker, Kyler, and Caleb all became number 1 overall picks, and Baker and Kyler have gone on to have successful NFL careers, I think you'd say, have already made their second contract, so they haven't flamed out. And now Caleb Williams is arguably the best of the bunch, the most talented of the bunch, with the brightest potential future, I think you'd say, of the 3. So this is the first year that he doesn't have one of those guys running the show for him. It's expected that Miller Moss is going to slide in and be the quarterback for him this year. Moss showed what he could do when given an opportunity last year in the bowl game against Louisville. He led USC to a 42-28 win through 6 TDs along the way. And Lincoln Riley, he's a great offensive play caller, great schemer. The question marks are more so on definitely on the defensive side, but also kind of just the physical nature and I guess winning the big game as well. But still a super young head coach. I don't really think it's time to press the panic button, but I do think there is a little bit reason to have some disbelief just because of the construction kind of the roster and what we're accustomed to with him. Is he able to adapt with that going forward? But Riley is great at scheming guys open and getting the weapons, the ball in space. So Miller Moss is going to have a lot of open throws, a lot of open opportunities. He's going to have to run the show. And he showed he was able to do that last year, 6 touchdowns in that bowl game, given, the circumstances of players opting out, players transferring, all that good jazz. Still going out and putting up 42 points on 6 touchdown passes is no easy recipe at the Power 5 level in college football, Power 4 now. But Miller Moss will have one of, if not the most electric weapon in all of college football this year, in Zachariah Branch. Really excited to see him. I think he's going to be used. We saw him a lot last year in that freshman year that he had used kind of all over the place. And I think even this year we'll see a more expanded role. They don't have like a true number 1 legit receiver, but he's more of kind of the do-it-all gadget type guy. He could have a Tavon Austin type of role that we saw from Tavon Austin during some parts of the NFL, but mainly his time at West Virginia, where whether it's getting the ball thrown to him down the field on screens, reverses, handoffs, returns, you name it, USC will try and get the ball into his hands as much as possible. And then Jacoby Lane is another name that's looking like a explosive weapon that USC is going to be trying to get the ball into his hands at all times too. So look for those 2 guys to be some pretty electric playmakers. And I think that is kind of one of the benefits, I guess, from going to the Big Ten. When you think the Big Ten football, you think physical, kind of in the middle of the field, running the ball, hard hitting. You don't really think elite athletes, super speed on the outside. So I think that these guys are going to have that advantage and potentially throw some of these Big Ten defenses off guard a little bit with their speed and their explosion. They return only 3 starters up front on the offensive line. You'd like to return 4, ideally 5. That's nice, especially when you're transferring from or transitioning over from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. I definitely am worried about the offensive line up front and the lack of physical nature that we've seen from USC under Lincoln Riley. But last year, the offense ranked top 10 in scoring, passing, and total offense, but they did struggle to run the ball. So only 3 starters returning on an offensive line and a group that wasn't really overpowering last year in the running game. I am a little bit worried about that because in the Big Ten, you are going to have to run the ball. You're not going to be able to drop back and throw it 45, 50 times a night. If you do, I think you're going to get yourself into some trouble, especially when you're playing some of these more cold weather games on the stretch. You might start out hot in end of August, September, and October, but then once you get into November and December and you want to be playing college football playoff type of football, you're going to have to be able to run the ball. And I don't know if this team is going to be able to do that, but they bring in Mississippi State transfer, Woody Marks. He's going to be the main guy in the backfield to start the year. It remains to be seen if he can elevate a USC rushing attack that was subpar last season, but that's going to be something big as they transition. They have to be able to kind of control the line of scrimmage more. When we go to the defense, the major area of concern for this program, not only now, but going forward under Lincoln Riley, is this defensive unit for sure. They failed to rank in the top 100 in any of the four major defensive categories. 118th in scoring, 116th in rushing, 101st in passing, and 116th in total defense. A terrible unit last year where even if they are 75 or above, who knows? Maybe that is a 10-win team. They were just so bad on defense last year. They really hurt them and cost them in a lot of games. It's a major red flag, I think, going forward. They fired defensive coordinator Alex Grinch towards the back half of last season, towards the end, and they bring in from UCLA, their defensive coordinator from last year, D'Anton Lynn. He's going to be in charge of that operation now and fixing the ship over there. The true concern, though, I think, especially just watching USC kind of eye test wise, was the tackling and lack of effort at times, because they have talented players. They recruit well. They are able to bring in guys from the portal, but the defense was embarrassing last season, quite frankly, flat out. Like, just tackling, effort at times. They looked like they kind of just wanted to get off the field and let Caleb Williams go and hopefully score 45 to 50 points and win the game for you. So when you have that as a major area of concern, that kind of says something to me. That's a big change that you need to be able to get into that defensive unit and talk to them. UCLA's defense was much better last year, so there's hope that Lynn is able to kind of entrust this new belief and new energy into this defensive unit. But the USC defensive staff hit the portal hard last year. They brought in 6 players who have a combined 111 starts. They should instantly make that defense better. The secondary is completely revamped as well. They bring in transfers from Oregon State, Mississippi State, and UCLA that is going to redo a unit that allowed 246 passing yards per game. That was 101st in the country last year. But the star player on this unit, the guy that's going to be looked at to be the difference maker on a defense that really underperformed last year, and USC needs to perform better this year, is defensive lineman Bear Alexander. And as I said, effort and tackling was a major concern last year, and you can point to him as one of the main guys that was lacking in that department. When his motor is running and when he's playing hard and at a high level, he is one of, if not the best defensive lineman potentially in this Big Ten conference. Like, he's a first round type of talent, but he only shows it in flashes. He needs to be able to do that each and every down. And in the Big Ten, against more physical offensive linemen, is he going to get pushed around and kind of let them get to him and then let the motor shut off? That's something that remains to be seen. But returned 4 starters from a defense last year. They're banking on the acquisition of a new DC and the transfer pieces to really improve this unit that was embarrassing last year. After their first 3 games, they gave up 28 or more in every single game the rest of the season. So major changes were needed on that defense. Major changes were made. Let's see if it pans out. But now we'll get into my schedule preview for this UCLA squad as they head into year 1 in the Big Ten and year 3 under Lincoln Riley. I'll pull up my screen and bring up the schedule. I'll be quite honest, not that high on the squad going into the year. I think we could kind of tell that throughout my tone and throughout the breakdown of the offense and the defense. But a really tough week 1 game against LSU, neutral site. I think LSU has a little bit more returning continuity with the offensive line. Definitely, I think they're going to be able to push USC on the defensive line around, and I think they're going to be able to kind of run the ball down their throat early and often. That's a game where Bear Alexander really is going to need to make his impact felt, but I'm going to give LSU the win there. Utah State, I will give USC the win. At Michigan, that's going to be a tough one. Another kind of welcome to the Big Ten game where Michigan pushes them around a little bit. So give me Michigan for a win there. Give me USC beating Wisconsin at home. Give me USC going to Minnesota and winning. Give me Penn State going to USC and winning. I think Penn State is much better suited right now in that physical department. At Maryland, I will give USC a win. That is a tough game, though, a weird one, a cross-country road trip. So that's one of the big things with realignment this year as well. You got teams like USC going to Maryland, and then you got a team like Rutgers the next week traveling to USC. I will have USC winning that game. And then I think that's a really tough end to the season here for USC. I don't think UCLA necessarily will be a great team this year, but I think they're going to be a tough team. By the end of the year, one of those teams that it's like, all right, it looks like they're building something for the next year. So that would be considered, I guess, the cupcake of this last bunch. But at Washington, always a tough place to play. Don't know what to expect out of Washington this year, but they're not going to be a cupcake or a walkthrough. I'll give Washington the win there. Nebraska is one of my surprise teams in college football this year. I think they could be a 9-10 win team, potentially compete for a playoff spot. They're one of my breakout squads. I'm going to give Nebraska the win there. At UCLA, I'm going to give UCLA the win there in a rivalry game. And versus Notre Dame, that's a big one for them. They're going to be a team that is competing for a playoff in 11 to 10 wins probably. So I'm very low on this USC squad as they head over to the Big Ten. I don't think that they have the physical nature right now to compete with some of these big boys. So I have a 5-7 record this year for USC. And I think it's going to be a down year. I think there's going to be a lot of criticism under Lincoln Riley, but we talked about it earlier. 74-18 as a head coach. Give this guy, at least one more year. Don't hit the complete panic button yet. But there is going to be, I think, a culture shock for a lot of these teams in realignment where you had rosters for all this time that were built to play in other conferences, and you had these speedsters, you had these track stars. You're going to need to kind of focus more on the trenches and these grown men to compete with at the top, Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, some of these other big boys. So 5-7 for USC. Their over-under of win total sits at -140 for the over at 7 wins. And the under at +120. Obviously, I have them at 5-7, so I would lean under. But it's a bet that I'm not most likely going to place because a lot of these games are coin flips, like Washington, Nebraska, UCLA. Those games could all go anyway. Week 1, even in the game against LSU bringing in a new quarterback, a lot of skill position guys, and major question marks on that defense as well. Look to bet the over in that game. I think there could be a lot of points in that one, but I think 5-7 is my prediction. But there are some coin flip games that I could see them kind of their ceiling being like an 8-4, but 5-7 probably, maybe even 4-8 as low as it goes. But in between 4-8 and 8-4, I see I could see going either way. I won't be a team that I bet for a preseason win total, but I would lean towards the under there, especially at plus money. But 5-7, I don't think it gets Lincoln Riley fired, but I do think it gets him at least one more year to prove that he can make it in the Big Ten. But that'll do it for this episode of the Beef Up Front podcast. As always, thank you everyone for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and we'll talk soon.